Okay, we should be live. I did say
Right.
it was on YouTube, so
Where's
just verify real quick with the.
from over here? From back there.
It was back there.
No,
It's right there, yeah.
there.
Seeing from the ceiling.
We're live on YouTube, you guys.
Okay, all right. Welcome everyone to the North Logan City Planning Commission meeting here on June 8th, 2023. We will get started with Teresa leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by prayer by Heron.
Please join me with the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Our Father in heaven, we are grateful to be able to meet together as a planning commission for North Logan City, and grateful for those who have joined this meeting, for those, the leaders of this city who are under direction to care for the needs of this city. We pray that we will follow their pattern and do the things which will benefit the citizens of this city. We pray thy spirit to be with us. We pray that we will do that which would be in accordance to the codes and rules and laws. And this we ask in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
And thank you, Teresa and Heron. Do we have a motion to adopt the agenda as constituted here before us this evening?
My motion.
I second it.
Okay, so we have a move by Heather and a second by Heron to adopt the agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, unanimous adoption of the agenda. And then we also have a series of minutes from prior meetings to go ahead and approve. And Marie, I didn't bring my laptop this evening, so
Looked at them, I still remember the date, March. There's.
okay, saw the email. Okay,
Okay.
so March 2nd. So I reviewed those. Commission, I don't know if you had a chance to review those.
Looked over. 'em.
Okay, all right. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes from the March 2nd, 2023 Planning Commission meeting?
I motion to approve the March 2nd
Okay,
meeting minutes.
and do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, so a motion by Heather to approve those minutes from March 2nd, second from Heron. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Was that an aye?
Aye.
Teresa also? That, oh,
Yeah,
you do in this case.
Well, that's correct. So we would need a quorum. Well, we do have three, so you're correct. We've got a quorum. Yep, so you would be okay to withstand.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Or no.
Well, so Teresa's the alternate, and when we have a quorum present, then we can vote with the quorum. If, for example, a quorum is not present, then Teresa would then step in as.
Oh, I thought she could vote substituting for any member that's not present in that evening. Is that not true?
That could be true. We
Okay.
need to look at the
Okay.
rules of order.
Okay, yeah. We're all learning together.
Yeah, and it's also interesting because on meeting minutes, Commissioner Tyre obviously is participating in the discussion. She's not a voting member, but she has, dialogue in the minutes. So I don't know that it's harmful to have her also review her dialogue and approve her statements as well.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
Okay.
can take a look at the rules of order and clarify that.
okay, very good.
Yep.
In the meantime, with the quorum of three here, we did have unanimous approval of the March 2nd meeting minutes. And any follow-up issues from previous meetings, Scott?
Yeah, so it's been a minute since we've met. We canceled our last meeting just due to a few folks being out of town visiting family. And we had a lighter agenda, so we went ahead and canceled in order to have more present for this discussion. So the only item actually that we discussed back on May 4th was the Hopkins ADU and putting more clarification into the record for our findings of fact, conclusions of law, and making sure that that discussion was a little bit more robust on the record. So as far as that item is concerned, we are going to wait until the meeting minutes are fully transcribed, reviewed, with ample time for the commission to review those minutes and then approve them. Once approved, then we'll have an updated record to then move forward to schedule a follow-up hearing with our administrative appeals hearing officer for further discussion and further review of the action taken by the planning commission. So that being said, those meeting minutes are in process. They're nearly complete. We want to give the commission plenty of time to review those. And we'll come back on the 22nd, our next meeting, to have those formally approved. If approved, then we'll go ahead and schedule a follow-up hearing with the administrative appeals hearing officer for that appeal to continue down the review process.
And we would still, in that case, the documentation we provide to the administrative appeal authority would be beyond just those meeting minutes, right? We have that.
Correct. So there
Separate.
was that updated notice of decision that was sent over to the applicant, which took that document that we had worked on during that planning commission meeting and adopted that language. And so staff went ahead and added that to a notice of a decision to further bolster the record, which the meeting minutes will reflect as well. So between the meeting minutes and that notice of decision, we'll pass that back over to the administrative appeals hearing officer for his further review and decision. His initial review, the initial action taken the first time this item was reviewed by the commission was to then remand it back for more discussion, formal written facts of finding, conclusions of law, which we have now done. And so the next step in the process is for it to go back to the hearing officer for a more robust review on his end.
Yeah, I had to miss that May 4th meeting, so I look forward to reviewing those minutes.
Perfect.
Thank you.
That's only a follow-up item that I have from that previous meeting that we had held.
Okay, very good. Okay, for our work session this evening, then our item number 1 is a discussion on the city's road and transportation master plan. Amendments, proposed updates, and a discussion regarding the upcoming general plan rewrite and how the road and transportation master plan will be incorporated into that. So with that, Scott, we've got some maps to review.
We do. And we also have a new member of the North Logan staff.
Oh,
So
yes.
Hila, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself real quick, and then we'll provide a little bit more detail on what this item is about.
Welcome.
Thank you. Okay, so like Scott said, my name is Hila Werner. I'm the community development intern, so I'm just working with Scott. And I'm just here studying at Utah State, and I've been enjoying and really grateful for this internship that North Logan City has provided for me.
Your first name is Hugh?
Hilo.
Oh, Hilo. Okay.
Hilo, yeah.
All right.
So Hilo is in the landscape architecture and environmental planning LAEP program up at Utah State. And the city was looking for someone to help us out with quite a few design projects with regards to parks design. So future, improvements to Elk Ridge and Meadowview and other park facilities that we have. Also to help us with some interesting projects like the one we have on our agenda today with our transportation master plan. A skill set that Hilo has that we were looking for is graphic communication. So working through Adobe Cloud, Creative Cloud, and those graphic programs to help tell stories with graphics instead of just long, boring sentences that don't capture people's attention. So one of the tasks that we had Hilo work on was looking at our transportation master plan. And one thing that I had realized when I first started here with the city is that we have various exhibits that are legislatively adopted, such as our transportation master plan, that are technically the law of the land as far as that document is concerned. However, you'll see on the first map that the first that exhibit was adopted in 2013 with our general plan at the time. And since then, we've had several adjustments to that exhibit, which had gone through the proper process to have review through the planning commission and a decision by the legislative body, which is the city council, to modify certain sections of that plan. But those adjustments never got codified onto the exhibit. The exhibit wasn't updated to reflect those changes. So we have an out of date exhibit that we want to bring up to speed. But I'll have Hilo go ahead and present what he has put together on these exhibits and kind of talk you through the difference between each of the three maps. And then we'll kind of talk a little bit more about what we do next with the general plan that we're going to be doing here pretty soon.
Thank you, Scott. So like Scott said, the first exhibit is the approved 2013 version of the Transportation Master Plan. And so this is, I just copied this directly off of the website, downloaded the file and just recreated it online. But then the second exhibit is the amendments to date, like Scott was saying, everything that's been approved and the changes that have been made, but just haven't been added graphically to the map. So on the second one, there's some items that have been added and some items that have been removed. So let's see.
Yeah, so just so Hilo knows, I went ahead and printed each of these exhibits, so you have a paper copy and they go in order. So the first stack in the stapled packet is the 2013 master plan as it was originally adopted back in 2013. And we can pull each of these up digitally as well. But the second one is showing those amendments that have been made to date that we just haven't updated the exhibit on, but are technically effective, went through the process approved by ordinance. And then that third one are some proposed adjustments. You want to start on this second one, Hilo, or where would you like to?
I guess, yeah, just a quick review of the changes that were made thus far. So working west to east, so 400 west, the road type was updated and then the alignment was changed. And then, let's see. And
So
then,
this is on your second exhibit,
Yeah.
if you're looking on your packet.
yeah, and so the things that have been added are are highlighted in red, but then the things that have been removed are just outlined with a red circle.
So this is deleted, this is added.
And then, so part of the city center, part of the commercial streets, on 100 East, we removed that section of the commercial road because the land's been developed within the past 10 years. And then we've connected 2100 north to 2000 north. And then up on the bench, removed a section of, I think would have been 2350 east and then added an extension up on the north side.
Can I ask a question on that, Hilo?
Yeah.
I know at least part of the motivation, as I understand it, to remove 2350 East was because of the challenge and exorbitant cost in constructing a road with that level of grade and going over that drainage area there.
Mhm.
Would we not run into the same problem with the collector that we just added there to the north of it?
I'm not exactly sure.
This one here to the north. So the topography up
No.
there is a little bit more of a shelf. It's
Is it?
a little bit
Okay.
flatter. There are some challenges. You can kind of see this drainage channel. That'll be a challenge, I'm sure, but generally speaking, here is quite a bit more challenging than from the existing stub heading north. It was a compromise at the time when we had taken this section off. We changed the zoning in addition and then had made this connection instead.
Okay, thank you.
So Scott, a quick question. That part that we have taken off that road, there will never be a road in there, so that land beyond that east will not be developed. Is that correct?
No, that's not necessarily correct. It could develop under existing standards, but the road would not be a master plan road that the city would participate in that road being installed. There could be minor development in this area if a developer could show how they can mitigate the slopes and put in, a development that can meet all those geographic or geologic constraints. Yep. So this second exhibit that he was explaining, these are all changes that have already been adopted in the past. They simply haven't been added graphically to the exhibit. So this second exhibit is just kind of bringing it up to speed of where we are today. So we have an up-to-date exhibit. When folks come in looking to, develop, they want to understand what is the current transportation master plan. And we have, the existing, adopted it back in 2013, and then we have ordinances that supplement that, but we don't have an exhibit that visually depicts those changes having been made. So that's what this second exhibit is doing here. Want to go on to the next one?
Yeah,
Okay, we'll move over to the third.
yeah. So then for the third version with our proposed amendments, we've done a couple of changes with it. The first one is, if you look on the previous exhibits, there's the master plan transition point. And so those are like the little orange circles with an X in it. And when I was recreating the map, they didn't serve much purpose aside from showing where the green line turns into purple or the green line turns into black. And so we decided, or we're proposing to remove those, and then we've added in the instead existing and proposed traffic lights and roundabouts. And so we took out the transition points so we have clarity on the intersections.
Yeah, if you look, those circles that were on the previous legend at the top of the legend, they were simply indicating when a particular road type or cross section would change to a different cross section, and they were getting confused with potential intersections or signals, stop signs, which wasn't the case. It was just simply that the road would then change from, a particular classification to another. So the proposal is just to take those off to improve legibility, and then put on different symbology for traffic signals, whether they're existing or proposed. So it's more of just a legibility adjustment. There's nothing substantial about that change per se. Any questions on that change? Okay, Hila, you want to describe, you want to start from left to right, or let us know how you'd like to work through it?
I guess, should we start with the rural roads?
Sure.
So, Alan will have to remind me on what the classifications for a rural road is, but there are 3 in North Logan City and they just haven't been added to the map. And so we've added 3, 2,500 north, 1,000 east, and then 1,500 north, those small segments. And so those are just 3 existing ones that haven't been included on the map. So,
Yeah, they're already existing.
yeah.
So 20, go ahead.
You have a existing rural road and a non-existing rural road.
Okay.
There would be no need for a non-existing rural road.
Okay.
Rural road can only be roads that are existing already.
Yeah.
Good clarification. So in your legend, you'll see there's a dashed blue line. We'll just take that out.
So there'd be no road there.
There is, you'll see on the map, these existing segments are solid blue lines.
Yeah.
Meaning they're pre-existing. They just have the classification of rural road, which follows a lesser cross section. The legend shows a dashed rural road not existing. However, there's no location on the map where there is a proposed rural road. So we'll simply just need to update the legend to take out this dashed rural road call out.
So
makes
any
sense.
new proposed roads have to meet more stringent criteria than the rural
Standard
roads do.
cross sections. Yep.
Okay.
This is a really picky
No.
comment.
We want to clean things up.
But just as like you're looking at it, and if you were like gonna look up the hill, it'd be awesome if the numbers, when you turn the page, would flip. Does that make sense? So like when you look up, you see like 16.
Oh, you're
6.
looking at it with
Yeah, so
east.
Like if you want to
Yep.
turn and like kind of visualize it up on the map, that's a really, really picky thing.
So
I'm just
typically-
saying, if
East- east up
Typically with
instead of
maps,
west up.
yeah, you want the north facing up.
looking at this way.
You always, that's just kind of what is it? Not mapology,
No, I'm seeing the numbers.
cartography.
No, I'm saying.
Our mapper here.
I'm seeing the 400 east, the east. if you
Oh.
look.
Like
Does
this
that
one,
make sense?
Yeah.
1200 east.
So when you do want, if you do want to turn it, even though you make it north way,
If you turn it
Heather,
east
just
up,
turn it upside down and we'll be fine.
then.
Yeah.
upside
go
down,
west up.
Then in west. Okay, that's really, I was just saying. if
No,
you're-
you're not wrong. I think we're trying to get to a point where this is much more legible. And the next discussion we'll have regarding this is just getting this plan ready for us to further amend with the general plan. We just want to bring it up to speed. So we start with something that is consistent with what is existing. So as we go through our next big general plan rewrite, we're going to totally redo this with, I would hope, better graphic representation. Maybe something where we have maybe a professional graphics person put it together where it's much more legible, a little bit easier to read.
I only mean east to west, not north and west.
You just like the numbers turned around.
The east and west
Yeah.
ones.
Yeah.
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 You could go and want the road off. That's.
Alan is a mapper by trade. He went,
Yeah.
Have it with that described. You always want it on top.
Okay. Okay, gotcha.
cartography principles.
No, you're
Good
okay.
job, Heather.
I'm really sorry. This is I just wanted to look at it a certain way and then I was like, it's upside down and now I have to.
Yeah.
For the
No.
east,
It's
for the east and west. label
just only
roads.
east and west is what I'm
Yeah.
noticing.
I still have a question.
Yeah.
I mean, they're green lines to me, the rural ones, but maybe, I don't know, they look green, but. So you say they're not existing. But the 2200 north one is existing because they go on it the other day.
Which one? Where
Are you looking,
All
Yeah.
those dots.
you're looking at what's called a minor arterial. So we're looking over, so on 10th East, for example, do you see the cursor on the screen here, Commissioner?
It's just the blue dashed roads.
These
that-
ones are,
Dashes. Yeah,
yeah.
there's no dash. in
Yeah.
that.
Okay, now look in the legend towards the bottom. In red, rural road not existing. See my cursor here, Commissioner Tyre?
Yeah, but I don't see. So all you're saying is those blue dots are only
We,
here and here, because these are straight, these aren't dots.
yeah,
So the dots are in this one and that one. This one and that one.
This is actually flat. And this is blue, and maybe that's where.
There's no dashes though.
Correct. We're saying that there's only existing rural roads, there's no. Proposed roads.
And there never will be.
There, so we just goes away.
The dotted ones, right?
And that's where maybe we can do a better job with the actual. Design, where our color codes is separate and on the color.
This is.
I would love
great.
that.
I'm just,
The reason I said that the legend, not on the map. right?
All right, you just want it off, so nobody's looking for the blue dots, because there's none there.
That's right.
And there never will be.
There will never be a road.
So there's no reason to have them.
When the city created this, it was only for existing roads that don't.
Hmm.
So it's basically giving a classification to some existing roads that don't meet any other standard.
Okay.
So,
we're
but
just
we're
gonna
not going to
cross-
approve any additional ones.
The blue dots will just be crossed off.
In the
green
legend.
Dots still stay.
It's a different classification.
aren't they black dots?
He said these are black dots, these.
Yeah.
Yeah, up here, this is where Commissioner Tyre was looking. And I think where it's mixed with the red, the black maybe looks
Yeah.
blue.
Yeah.
And it could just be our printer and the toner that the printer used, you know, kind of confusing.
Scott, question.
Huh?
Future, looking down the future, these proposed roundabouts, any idea of a proposed timetable for when those are going to be put in?
They're all going to be different and they're based on regional plans. The COG, for example, would have maybe some timelines. It's all on capital projects.
1800 North 8th East.
That one's far. They're finalized for that one. 2500 north 8 east. We've already received the funding for that.
This one right here.
Which one was that?
The 25.
2500 north.
Oh, the 2500 North.
2500 North 8th East. I think a lot of the timing has to do with demand. So when the demand necessitates a change in the intersection, that's when it would be justified, but not until. So generally speaking, with road improvements, we don't do road improvements until it's necessary. You know, an intersection is
Good.
failing and we need to update its or increase its capacity. But once we realize that they're reaching a failing point, then they start being added to capital improvement plans. And then scheduled for funding and, you know, over time they get added to the funding lists.
Okay, fine, thanks.
One road on these proposed amendments that we would like to add that hasn't existed before is this segment right here. 1400 East, this is a mid-block connection that wasn't here in the past. The idea being that eventually there may be an opportunity to connect some of these mega blocks. And if we were to look at it on the GIS, which we can, there is a potential connection with future development through here where there aren't existing homes that would frustrate that road going through. So the proposal is adding this road to allow for the master plan to show that. So when development does get proposed in this area, we can request that that road be put in. Maybe let's go to the GIS and look at it on the map just so we can be aware of it. Okay, so this is between 23, 25, and 14 Bs. Okay, so here's 2300. Here's the future 2500 north. So this 2500 north is master plan to connect through here roughly. And this is the proposed segment that is being added to that transportation master plan. And the reason why we believe that it could connect up and through is because we have all this empty developable space and we have an easement in this area where, for example, if we were to pull this private lane and create it into a public street, we could provide access and developability on this inner block. This is also a bit of an old piece of land that was split up back before we had really true subdivision ordinances. And so it's a bit of a non-conforming configuration that if this wanted to develop out of, an agricultural use, they would have to have access off of a publicly dedicated road, which is where this segment could facilitate the conversion of these. They're kind of just storage sheds right now, individually owned, very non-conforming for the area. But also, these potential owners back here would then be able to provide frontage to this interior lot. So I wanted just to kind of point that out as this is proposed amendments, that's something new that you wouldn't have seen prior. You guys have any questions on that segment being added?
Nope.
When we update the general plan, we'll start looking at some of these inner blocks and whether or not, maybe master plan transportation connections could or should be made based on our growth projections. But for now, this is one we know probably should have been added to the map a while back, but we'll go ahead and add it now since we're making changes. Okay. Keeler, do you want to keep going through the classifications?
Yeah, so then if you look at the city center on 2200 north, it says we extended the classification of 2200 north west of 200 east. And that's just because this, correct me if I'm wrong, Scott, but the zoning of the area requires like that segment is a certain classification for the city center that's coming in. And so we just updated the road type there.
Yeah, we're just making sure that this segment matches what the city center ordinance calls for on frontages of 2200 north. So we're actually going to be seeing a proposal here pretty soon. We've received a preliminary application for a development proposal on this parcel just to the east of IFA. And as part of any approval on this land here, because they have frontage on 2200 north, they're required by the city center ordinance to install a certain road cross section that's a little bit more pedestrian friendly than a traditional cross section would have been. So that's why we've changed this classification to match that city center. As you'll see east of the intersection, that orange, this is all 2200 north frontage for the city center. That is actually still carried through to this point because all of this land up here is zone city center commercial. So this is just updating the color to match the ordinance that was adopted for development that controls all of the city center zoning. That makes sense? Okay. All right, Healy, you want to continue
Yeah.
on?
And then the two other kind of more minor adjustments is that we extended the railroad down. And that's simply because on the previous versions, it didn't go along the length of the city boundary, but it does. So we updated that. And then the city boundaries have updated in the past 10 years. So then some segments of 200 west and 1800 north have been removed just because they're outside the jurisdiction.
You can see that here in this red bubble outline. This is no longer within our boundaries, so take it off the plan.
And then the last thing is that so then the last thing is for 2600 north, we are proposing to extend it west to connect to 200 west just for some more city interblock city connectivity.
Yeah. You guys may or may not be aware of this, but this particular intersection on Main Street at 2850 2850 North. There's a little bit of some back and forth discussion with UDOT on whether or not this intersection meets their separation standards for signalized intersections. City, views that this is an important intersection to have a signal on to, further allow for economic development opportunities at this intersection. But right now it's a proposed signal, but we're not quite sure. We're discussing with UDOT, the practicality of having a light here. They sit on one side of the fence, we sit on the other, but for now it's a proposed signal. But this particular segment of road is not shown currently on the transportation master plan, but we believe that it's a good connection to be made through to provide additional, commercial and industrial frontage. Any questions there?
I don't have a question on that segment of road, and I don't want to digress from the discussion of tonight's meeting, but at some point in time, this map reminds me, I would love to understand how our north border came to be. Because
At 3100,
that's along the whole east to west, that north border is just, kind of crazy. Like,
I think it can be summarized with sewer, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Crazy. I can't say how it really is. But as the two cities started expanding about 40 years ago, they developed an anti-takeover plan to try to meet in the middle. But when they did that, certain areas weren't able to sewer by car or by multiple, but the drain. That's kind of a local between the two cities, 31 and more. It's like roughly what it should be in the mall.
yeah, except like on 6th East. On 6th East, you're at like 26 North almost. So kind of a big difference
Yeah.
for 2 blocks.
It'll go back.
Okay, I got you. Okay. Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah,
Even crazier stuff.
that's true. Okay, thanks.
Are there any other changes we need to cover, Hilo? that you know
No, I
of?
think that's all of them.
Okay, so just to clarify the railroad section on the left, we're not proposing to put in any new railroad that's pre-existing. We're just trying to show the existing conditions. The previous map showed that it ended just right here at the airport, which obviously isn't true. It continues through. So we just wanted to make sure that it reflected current conditions.
Can I ask a totally different question?
Yep.
So when you see this, is this all the roads or is there roads that don't show here?
Yeah, this is not all the roads, so you can kind of see there's a whole bunch of, neighborhood streets. Like, I'll zoom in, you can kind of see them just with the semi-transparent.
Oh, so you can kind of, okay, it's just not one of those main colors, but there are other roads.
Yeah,
Okay.
these are not master plan. So these are all subdivisions and the developer put these roads in to provide frontage to all of the lots. And they are publicly dedicated roads, so the city does maintain them, but they're not master planned. And so we don't anticipate them being primary collector streets or arterial streets that service a greater interconnectivity throughout the community. And we don't also contribute to the installation of those streets. The developer pays for those in their entirety. Yep. Correct. And so everything on the map is master plan. The master plan street then qualifies them for other funding sources as well. So as we're working with regional entities like the COG or the CMPO, Cache Metropolitan Planning Organization, if it's not master planned, then they typically don't qualify for any kind of funding through those entities or grant opportunities. So these are our major transportation connections for through traffic interconnectivity, not just local streets for just individual home connections. Obviously, we have driveways off of these all the time, but they're not subdivided, developer installed streets.
Okay,
Okay.
is that it for our item number one then, or are we?
Yeah, this is just a work session,
Okay.
so it's open for discussion, just making sure you guys are aware of this. We'll bring it back for a formal public hearing because it is technically an amendment to our general plan, our 2013 general plan. So there is a very specific noticing requirement through the state that we have to go through to let the residents know we're proposing some adjustments to the transportation master plan, which is an element of the general plan, a chapter, an exhibit in the general plan. So we'll do that. We'll go ahead and get those notices sent out, and then we'll probably bring it back on the 22nd for a public hearing. And then after that hearing and recommendation, we'll take it to city council for adoption. And that'll just kind of wrap this thing up with a nice pretty bow. So when we jump into our new general plan update, we have an existing conditions, existing document with all the adjustments we've made in the past as a clean, I guess, line in the sand to start off of. And as we look at the general plan going forward, we're then looking at future growth and what changes might need to happen to this plan to accommodate that future growth. So there'll be more changes to this, but we wanted to just bring this up to speed to where it should be now before we start jumping into a new general plan process and making further adjustments based on our future growth. Okay.
So when it comes back next time, will these red ovals and stuff be gone then, and they'll just be put in as real?
Yeah, this will likely be an exhibit in an ordinance. But then what we'll do is we'll clean this up, take those red ovals off, and it'll just be a clean exhibit that we'll then put on our website. It'll be updated in the actual master plan or general plan going forward. So if anybody comes to the city and says, I'd like a copy of your general plan, please, we actually have a general plan that is fully up to date with codified changes going forward. Okay. So that's it. Hilo, do you have anything else you want to add? Okay. We'd like to
Hilo.
appreciate Hilo for working on this, giving us a little bit of extra bandwidth to get
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
cleaned up.
It's awesome.
Absolutely. Thank you, Hilo. Okay, item number 2 on our agenda for tonight is a working session discussion on potential amendments to the city's conditional use and accessory dwelling unit ordinances.
Okay, this is kind of a big
Packet.
document. There's not a ton of red lines, but it does touch quite a few sections, and so there's quite a bit to kind of wrap your head around. I think we're all a little bit weary of just how precise sometimes we have to look at some of this language.
Yeah.
But I don't want that to be a fear point that makes us look at it from a hyper scrutinous standpoint. You can literally wordsmith until you go crazy. That's what the attorneys are for. But, we have identified issues in our accessory dwelling unit, conditional use permit, short-term rental language, based on recent past experience. That we said, well, that's an issue. So let's go ahead and fix it. We know that it has been an issue. Let's get in there and take a look and see if we can improve that process, because if we have another application come through, we're going to have to use the existing language that has been problematic in the past. So let's jump in and look at it. Now, there's one other item that I've wrapped into this proposal. It is our noticing requirements. And just to give a little bit of history on this, the legislature, this past legislative session, they have chosen to standardize noticing across the state. For all municipalities and counties that are making decisions that require public noticing, they've standardized it into a new process where they have Class A notices and Class B notices. Class A, Class B, they're based on different decision types, different application types. And when we have those applications come before us, the state would like for everybody to be uniform in how they're noticing. So in order to try to hit 2 birds with 1 stone and get some of these legislative updates incorporated, I'm just going to put them all in a few of these red lines. I don't believe it's going to be controversial because it's a state mandated noticing regimen going forward. So I've taken all of the sections that talk about noticing and I've incorporated it into this red line draft. But I've also added sections in here that talk about accessory dwelling units, conditional use permits, and short-term rentals. And we're going to look at them all together. We're going to kind of clean up the ADU issues, the difference between internal and detached. And we're going to strike all the noticing and just say noticing is going to comply with state requirements, period. So whenever anybody comes to us and says, I've got a subdivision that I would like to review, we'll say, okay, a subdivision is administrative. We don't have to notice. But if somebody comes to us with a rezone request, we'll say that's legislative. The state has a noticing requirement. We'll just read the state code and use the state code because that's what's required by the state. So we'll look in this red line exhibit, sections in here that are applicable to noticing. Most of them I've just plain stricken and said they're reserved sections. And the ones that have language that regards noticing, I've said, see the state code that requires the noticing for this type of a decision. Okay.
Scott, can I ask a
Clear.
quick question?
Yep.
As I was reviewing this, I noticed that it looked like you say, we're adding language to make specific accommodations for short-term rentals. Are we required to do that? Or can we
Accommodation,
just say no short-term rentals in North Logan?
you certainly could make that as a policy recommendation. Right now, our language says that they're permitted. Our existing codified code says short-term rentals are a permitted use in all residential zones. They're not permitted in commercial or industrial because residences aren't allowed there. But anywhere where, a dwelling can be built in town, it's a permitted use. That was a decision that was made by Planning Commission City Council a number of years back. And so that's how it stands today. Right now, this proposal strikes it as permitted and drops it down to conditionally permitted. And detached accessory dwelling units, where they were conditionally permitted previously, is being moved up to permitted. That's the proposal. And I believe that's the right, at least from my opinion, it's the right way to go, because the more impactful land use is the short-term rental. And I think that we should have more scrutiny on the short-term rental. So we can have an idea as to occupancy, maybe put a limit on occupancy and parking, have a very clear parking plan that we can enforce if they're out of compliance with that parking plan. So those could be conditions of approval if it's a conditional use permit that is required. Right now, short-term rentals are permitted, so we don't have any way to really tell them they're out of compliance other than the few standards that we currently do have in the code, which they're helpful. They're not super robust. A conditional use permit allows for the city planning commission as a land use authority to look at each individually to say, okay, what's unique about this particular property and its use as a short-term rental, and what conditions of approval should be instigated to mitigate their reasonably anticipated effects on the community. Whereas the detached accessory dwelling unit is conditionally permitted currently. And that use, if you look at the internal or attached accessory dwelling unit, that is permitted, detached, conditionally permitted. I feel like that's probably interesting. I'm not sure why. It's the same use, it's the same impact, but it's treated differently. Not only is it treated differently, but a detached accessory dwelling unit, we say in the code currently that we have to have noticing to all the neighbors, and we have to have a public hearing for a detached accessory dwelling unit to go in. I think that if we're going to have a hearing on anything, it should be the more impactful use, but that's what's proposed. Now that's open for discussion. That's my personal thoughts. That might not be yours. That might not be the city council's personal thoughts. But if I had to make some changes based on our past experience on some of these past applications, I would say, let's make the conditional use permit applicable to short-term rentals. And let's have the long-term rental, as far as the accessory dwelling unit, be the permitted use. As long as there's good standards for each of those, we can approve them administratively. Everybody has to play by the same rules, and those standards should be adequate to mitigate any issues that would be typical of a detached accessory dwelling unit. That's the crux. There's more cleanup in here for language, but broad strokes, if you're okay moving short-term rentals to conditionally permitted and elevating a detached accessory dwelling unit from conditionally to permitted, that's basically what this proposal does. But it also cleans up a lot of stuff as far as what is the square footage and how do we measure the square footage for a detached accessory dwelling unit, which we ran into some confusion just not too long ago. There's some changes to definitions for accessory dwelling units to make sure we're consistent in our terminology. We've called a detached accessory dwelling unit a number of different terms. Detached dwelling. There's a number of them, right? We've also called a single family detached home a number of things in our code as well. There's a bunch of different naming conventions, and this aims to just call it one thing. If we're calling a single family home, let's not call it anything else. And that's what I'm trying to do here, is just be consistent in our terminology. But all that said, it'd be good to have an extra couple set of eyeballs on this because there's pitfalls all over the place, as you know, in code. So
Hmm.
have you guys had a chance to kind of look through this and kind of wrap your heads around it a little bit? Is there anything immediately that pokes out to you as a red flag or problematic or self-defeating or repetitive or all of the above?
No, for me, like I say, it just looked like we were trying to make special accommodations for short-term rentals, which I know is kind of a contentious topic, so I wasn't sure
Yeah.
why if we were compelled to make those accommodations, but I guess right now we're compelled by the fact that it is permitted within these zones.
Correct.
I do wonder if at the time that the planning commission, city council approved that, if that was prior to the proliferation of companies that are short-term rental companies like Airbnb and VRBO and that type of thing.
Yeah. I can't necessarily tell you what their thoughts were or how prolific it was
Yeah.
at the time,
Yeah.
but this proposal actually reels back on short-term rentals, makes it a little bit harder to get a short-term, not, I mean, it's still a conditionally permitted use, so it's still a land right?
Yeah,
But it puts a little bit more scrutiny on those things, a little bit more control back into the city's hands instead of just having to issue a business license and off they go.
so hypothetically, if that ends up going to public hearing, gets approved and passed by the city council, everyone who currently is permitted for short-term rentals just gets grandfathered in.
That's right.
Okay,
Yep. Yeah, but if they don't renew their business license, then they'd have to come back through the new code. So
gotcha.
you'd have to come and get a conditional use permit at that point.
Okay,
Yep. So, yeah, there's no more allowances for short-term rentals. If anything, it's kind of restricting those just a little bit. They're still permitted everywhere that they were before, conditionally, if we go forward with this language. So it just gives us the ability to look at each of those proposals. We can look at the property specifically and say, well, maybe we need an occupancy cap on this because of its unique configuration. Let's see how much parking they have available, because we've heard with several of our existing rental units and through code enforcement efforts that on-street parking is a concern. And maybe if we're going to approve a short-term rental, we should make sure that they have enough parking for the occupancy that they would like to have on site,
And you have that in.
which
here.
is in here.
I know.
Yep. So it talks specifically to short-term rentals that all of their parking shall be on-site and off-street. Now, we're not banning on-street parking throughout the city with this, not at all. What it is basically saying is for that particular use, you need to be able to based on your occupancy, you need to be able to park those folks on site and not be clogging up the right of way. That's what is also in here.
My one question, because I noticed there were numbers, dealing with bedrooms and this and that. Is that just a number that's used around, or is
Yeah,
that?
the occupancy as far as 2 per bedroom plus
Well, you said
4.
how many parking stalls for each, you know what I'm saying? There's one part in there where it talks about the number of parking places that's needed for the number of people.
Right. That's towards the back.
Yeah, I know, I saw some stuff on my computer at home and now I can't find it here. It's kind of.
So there's actually 2 sections. So put a finger in page 5. And then flip to the back to, let's see here.
Yeah, there was a place that said this many bedrooms or something, then it's
Yeah.
many places. I just wondered where that number came from. I should have written the lines at from home, I didn't.
Okay, page 37, I believe is, so page 37 is specific to detached accessory dwelling units. And page 5 is specific to short-term rentals. So 2 different use types, but let's start on page 5 real quick with regards to parking. So page 5, section F2 on the top part of the page here.
Oh, yeah, that's,
So parking, a minimum of 1 off-street parking space shall be provided for each short-term rental in addition to any required spaces for the existing residential use. So we're just saying bare minimum, if you want to have a short-term rental, you have to at least have 1 to even be considered, because if we're changing the use, you should have at least 1 additional parking space. That's bare minimum. And then it says if the maximum number of persons that the short-term rental will accommodate is over 3 persons, one additional off-street parking space shall be provided for every additional 3 persons. So once you get to 3, then you need to start adding more parking for each additional 3 on site, right? Not on the street. And then it goes on, this is added language. Well, this is moved up, but so in the green underline, this is cut and pasted further up. It says all parking intended to accommodate a short-term rental shall be paved with surface material of asphalt or concrete composition. So we don't want people just parking on a grass area of the front yard. Needs to be a dedicated improved parking space.
But in that regard, a home could just say, well, our driveway will double as parking spaces for the
Very well could be.
detached ADU, right?
Because if they have, let's say they have a 2-car garage, the 2 spaces in their garage accommodates the single family dwelling's primary use of
Yeah.
dwelling. The 2 spaces on the front of the garage would be additional capacity, but then they would be limited because if they only have those 2 spaces in front of the garage, then their occupancy would be capped at
6
4, 6.
Or is, oh,
So it's
Yeah,
3 plus 1, yeah,
oh, yeah,
6.
you're right, yeah, yeah.
Yep. So then we would just in the conditional use permit say, based on your property, you don't have any additional parking, you're not proposing additional parking, so your occupancy is capped at 6. And it's just based on your ability to accommodate on the property. And then last sentence that I've added here says all parking associated with a short-term rental shall be kept on site and off street at all times. So now it's clear, that regardless of the time of year, if you have a short-term rental and you consistently have on-street parking associated with that rental, then we can go through the enforcement process. And if they're bad actors, we could then pull their conditional use permit. Yep. So let's hop to the back, page 37. This is more specific to just detached accessory dwelling units. This is the bottom of page 37, A1. There shall be provided at least 2 paved asphalt or concrete off-street parking spaces for the detached accessory dwelling unit, in addition to 2 off-street spaces required for the primary single-family residence, so 4 in all. Parking needed to meet this requirement shall not exceed 25% of the area between the front of the residence and the front property line. So we're just saying, we don't want your whole front yard turning into a parking lot. Any additional vehicle access to public roads must conform to North Logan design standards. All parking associated with a detached accessory dwelling unit shall be on site and off street at all times. So very similar. If it's a detached accessory dwelling unit, you have 2 spaces for the primary residence. And in order to be approved for that detached accessory dwelling unit, you have to provide another 2. So 4 in total, if we're going to allow for a detached accessory dwelling unit. That makes
So
sense.
where were you reading?
Page 37 at the bottom, and then we flipped over to page
Moving to
38.
38.
So if the owner is living in the detached accessory dwelling. That's the
So
2
can-
units. And if the other one
Maybe.
is a short-term
This
rental,
is the older percent on it.
So we haven't addressed multiple uses on the property.
That's
yet.
what I'm saying,
Haven't
that-
talked about that. yet.
yeah,
We can talk about it, and I think it's something we should. One thought that has been in my mind, I haven't put this in here yet, but I think we need to discuss it, is are we going to allow for somebody to build a detached accessory dwelling unit and use that dwelling unit for a short-term rental? Whether that's the detached accessory dwelling unit or the primary home. My personal opinion is that the whole accessory dwelling unit push from the state was to accommodate affordable housing, which is long-term
Yeah.
rentals, not short-term. That's my personal opinion, but there are arguments out there that detached accessory dwelling units allow for folks to afford the home that they're in. So if they have a change of, income, let's say somebody's injured or, has a medical issue and they don't have that income anymore, it's an asset that they have that they could leverage to help pay their primary mortgage, keep them in their home. It's also a tool for people who want to age in place. So as their kids grow up and move out, they don't want to maintain the primary residence anymore, but they want to stay in their yard. It's home to them. They could move into the detached accessory dwelling unit and rent out their primary home as a short-term rental or a long-term rental to try to make ends meet. I've had both arguments both ways that I think they make sense, but I ultimately come down to the whole reason why ADUs were permitted or required by the state was to try to bolster our affordable housing stock. So right now, we don't restrict it. We could certainly put something in the code or at least make that recommendation to the city council to say, we believe this should be codified. If that's the way you think, but I guess that's open for discussion. I haven't put anything into the code yet that clarifies detached accessory dwelling units or internal accessory dwelling units have to be used for long-term rentals. Right now, our code does not clarify. You guys have thoughts on that?
It's just-
Opinions?
It's just a problem, I think. I mean, it's something.
I've had, so this is the second, I guess, opportunity I've had to talk about short-term rentals in my career. At Weber County, I literally worked on short-term rentals for a year and a half, writing their ordinance from scrap because it was something that was more prolific. The Ogden Valley has a ton of short-term rentals associated with the ski resorts, and it is changing the character of that valley. And there's folks on both sides of the fence, folks that say, I own property, let me do what I want with it. If something changes and I need that revenue stream, I should be able to pursue that. But then there's other folks that say, absolutely not. We don't want our neighborhoods changing their composition, and we don't want it changing the character. If you can't afford to live there anymore, maybe you need to make other changes in your housing. Because to them, the integrity of their neighborhood was more important. So there's arguments both sides. Property rights arguments is strong from some folks. But other people also argue that the property rights are being infringed upon because they no longer have that quiet and peaceful enjoyment of their property because of these rentals that are occurring adjacent.
I think it is worth looking at here because at least anecdotally, for every one person I hear advocating for short-term rentals, I hear 10 who are strongly opposed to it here in North Logan.
They are very vocal about it,
Yeah.
for sure. Yep.
But I do think it's the future,
So they're, and that's.
or like that there's, having these accessory dwelling units, having those things, I do
Yeah.
think.
The market's
Housing's
changing.
out of control.
People have, there's a demand.
And they might want to build a little unit.
For the long-term rentals, I agree,
Term,
but short-term rentals don't help the housing.
Yeah,
crisis.
no, it's
Correct.
true. I just think it's so.
I mean, correct, but I mean, that does help the
Tricky.
housing crisis if, for example, you can't afford your home, your primary residence because of maybe a change in your income. Yeah, maybe there's an argument there to say, well,
Yeah,
helps me
yeah.
still afford to stay on my property where I've had a change of income, but I could rent this out to make ends meet. I think it's a pretty small argument. There's not very many folks in that.
Yeah,
boat,
it's true.
but-
Because some people maybe would say, oh, I want to do long-term rental and then I want to change it now to short-term
It's
rental.
not-
So I could see that
yeah,
they're
yeah.
feeling
you're
like
right.
they could do.
People like the flexibility.
But I don't know. It's not, I can see both sides of the argument. So
I
it's-
do like using that as an option for affordable housing as a long-term rental scenario,
Yeah.
but
That was
I
the
don't think
intent of the
people have a
state at the time. There's also folks that leave on sabbatical, leave on missions, leave for whatever, and they
Mhm.
want to just rent it out short term and not sign a lease, a long-term lease when they're only going to be gone for 6 months or, however long.
It is 6 months considered short-term, not long.
No, short term is only 30 days or less.
Oh, I thought you were saying, I was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
that's short-term?
No,
Seems long.
I mean, some folks rent short-term rental units for a very long period of time, but
Okay.
so there's a lot of thoughts there. I think if I were to make my own personal recommendation, it would be to protect those for affordable housing. This is also something, if we make that policy decision, it actually helps us in our reporting to the state for moderate income housing, saying that this is a policy change that we made codified that protects moderate income housing opportunity. And that's something that we could report to the state that we've made progress on. Which, by the way, our report to the state for the year is due by August 1st. So there's not a whole lot of progress I feel like we can report, other than we do talk to every single developer that comes to the door and we try to advocate for opportunities for more affordable housing. Doesn't really go very far, but
What is the demand for short-term rentals? How many in North Logan City? Is there?
There's a
much
handful of them.
push for it, or just like?
They don't know because they all don't get the permit. I mean,
Yeah,
there's people
most-
doing
Oh,
it
people,
without
yeah.
permit.
Fly under the
doing
radar.
it In my neighborhood, just kidding.
I will say that the ones that we've had issues with are full fairly often, and they're in a bit of a niche category where they have very large occupancies, and they are very good at hosting parties for funerals, baptisms, graduations, where the whole family's coming to town. They want to be able to get together in one location. There's not many facilities anywhere that allows for that. I mean, you could rent out a whole floor of a hotel maybe, but
We have a lot
Just-
more hotels now.
so anyways, that's a policy decision. That's a recommendation you guys can make to city council. Ultimately, they'll have to make a decision on that. Right now, it's silent, which means basically it's allowed to use.
Okay,
So,
interesting.
Consider North Logan as a bedroom community. Like
Yeah.
getting to Logan.
so was that a question, Aaron?
I didn't
No.
hear what you said.
I just say, consider North Logan as a bedroom community. We keep the way it is and let Logan build all the short-term rental houses for them. So,
Yeah, I mean, we're not a resort community, but there are still folks that come into town for business or for family gatherings, and there's a demand. I don't think it's as high as like Park City or Ogden Valley or Moab or other locations, in
you
the
know, we've got
state. but-
hotels for them.
Ski the Beeve isn't bringing in all the,
There are a few times a year when you could make a lot of money on a short-term rental
yeah.
Oh,
here in
absolutely.
North Logan.
There are game days,
Yeah,
folks will rent out their home just for game day weekend and they'll make their mortgage payment for that month.
It's huge for soccer tournaments too.
Yeah. Yep.
People are looking when they come. for those
Well, and
big
we were just saying small sat's huge. I feel like that was,
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I was thinking too.
people are staying in Ogden to get here.
A small sat
So
conference.
we don't
The
have-
conference, yeah.
Yeah,
You could easily pay off a few months of mortgage.
There were folks where I went to grad school at Texas A&M. There were folks that would go to visit grandma for a game day weekend and they would rent their house out and they would make several mortgage payments with just one rental period, just a game day weekend. So like small sat, any of these things where we've got an influx of folks in town, graduation weekend, where, it could be helpful to some folks to maybe put some money into their savings account or make some home improvements. They go visit grandma for the weekend.
But you're right,
Anyways.
though, the neighbors. We got to think of their property rights as well.
Yeah, there's both sides of the fence.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay, one thing I wanted to make sure you guys understood, this is not in final form. The reason being is because if we decide to make a recommendation that we change short-term rentals from permitted to conditionally permitted and detached accessory dwelling units from conditionally permitted to permitted, we'd actually need to take that section of code and move it elsewhere. Because right now, detached accessory dwelling units are in our conditional use code. And if we change it from conditional to permitted, we need to move it from conditionally permitted section to a standalone section and vice versa. Right now, short-term rentals is actually under our home-based business license code. We would need to leave it in there because they still need to get a conditional, or they still need to get a home-based business license, but they would also need to get a conditional use permit. So we need to have reference in both sections of code. So I need to make some changes. If you guys are okay with that direction, I'll make those adjustments to the red lines to more accurately depict a final product before we go forward for a public hearing.
mhm.
I
I
like
would
that.
agree with that, yeah.
And then I think when we get this maybe organized just a little bit more based on that feedback, take a minute to read through it. It's good to have another set of eyeballs. Read some of those definitions, make sure I'm not overlooking something. As you're crafting language, you read it, makes sense to you, but you may read it differently and it may be open for interpretation, which can be problematic. So
As we read through this, how is the best way to provide feedback? Do we have edit rights or at least comment rights on?
we certainly
document?
can, and we haven't, as a commission and with myself, we haven't really reviewed a larger proposal like this before, but I think what we certainly can do is put it in a Google Doc format. And when it's shared over to you, everybody can hop in, make comments or edits, or Heron, if you want to print it out, write on it, or if anybody else just prefers paper, I don't mind if you guys just make a paper red line, mark your comments, get it submitted to me, and then I can make adjustments based on your feedback. I can
Do you-
scan it in, we can share comments that way, whichever is most easiest to everybody. I know everybody kind of works differently, but
Do you edit this natively in Microsoft Word?
I do it in Word because the red lines are much easier to read than the red lines
agree.
in Google Docs. And then I upload it to Google Doc just to put it in the meeting folder.
Could you leave it in Word though? Is that
Yeah,
what you're saying? You
I
kinda want it in
Like
Word so he
tracking
can add his own
changes
comment?
in Word for me is
So much
preferred,
better.
but
What you can do, when I upload it as a Word doc to Google Docs, if you download it as a Google Doc, the formatting is preserved for the most
Oh.
part. And then you can just do your red lines and email it over or just re-upload it. Either way,
as a Word doc, you're
mhm,
saying.
just
Okay,
as a Word doc. It's saved
Okay.
it's saved in Google as a Google Doc, but it technically keeps all the Word doc formatting.
okay, yeah,
Yep.
okay.
So.
Where you got it.
Okay, well, if you guys have any other discussion or any other thoughts before I go back and make some adjustments, and then maybe then we go through it with a fine tooth comb.
Okay.
Or if you guys are comfortable with what you're seeing and are ready to move forward, once we make some of those adjustments, then we can call a public hearing as well. Either way.
Okay,
I didn't see any red flags in what I reviewed.
Yeah, I looked at it.
Mm.
There was just one part and I can't find it here, so I'm gonna make myself a note to go check it and see
Okay.
if I can find it at home. It
Yeah.
was just, it was something about the parking and it was, so such a problem doesn't,
I think you had mentioned it to me at the end of our last meeting where it was occasionally,
yeah,
Ex-
that was a different one though. This
Okay.
one said.
I
So
did
the
strike that.
problem doesn't something, and I'm thinking, just take out where the problem doesn't, but I can't find it now, so maybe you already took it
I
out.
might have changed. I did make some, I went back through it top to bottom again. It had been a minute since I had looked at it.
Okay,
Was
But-
everyone comfortable with the 2,000 total square feet? I saw that
Yeah.
changed to.
Yeah.
that's
Are you
something-
okay with 2,000
yeah, because
as
that just means 1,000 on each.
Yeah.
It was saying.
For the- all right, the footprint is still
Right.
1,000
Yeah.
Right,
square feet.
because it's just
Yeah.
a garage. and something
Yeah.
above
Right.
it,
Yep.
Garage, whatever you want to call that bottom floor. It's
Yep.
not a garage, Whatever it is, it's 1,000.
A child's
Yeah.
playroom.
The footprint will still not
Or
exceed
hot
1,000
that's
square feet.
maximum. I mean, it just, I thought to conceptualize it, we have large lot residential and small. That's maximum, right? So even in the 1 acre zones, that equates to the biggest you could possibly go is maybe a 3-car detached garage with a little apartment above. But there's also lot coverage ratios. So when we get to the smaller zones, they probably couldn't even realize this big of a detached accessory dwelling in it because the coverage ratio has been exceeded. They don't have enough buildable area in their yard to even get to this large of a size. So I wasn't worried about this maximum of 2,000 being used in a smaller zone. But maybe someone will exploit us and maybe there's a loophole in there that I don't don't know about, but that was my thinking. 2,000 was the cap, 1,000 on each level. And that's a decent sized 2-bedroom apartment at 1,000.
But there is still the height restriction that it cannot exceed the height of the
The
primary
primary.
residence.
Uh-huh.
Okay,
And then it still can't go above 35 either. So 35, but even so, if the home is a single level, then it needs to be, so if it's a gabled roof, there's still that height that it has to be subordinate to the primary home.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I remember the first one was. Well. The average.
That's if it's above a garage for the primary home. So if, for example, it's a detached building, you have garage space on the bottom, that footprint can only be 1,000 square feet. So the living space above can only be 1,000. So it's not it's not, the dwelling isn't like
It's a
2,000.
total,
Yeah.
which was, we had 1,000 and 1,500 before.
It would be capped at 1,000. Yep,
That's 1,000 of
It's a good
total living
question. This
space,
is
not
all the-
footprint.
correct.
Yeah,
You have to make sure.
Yeah. So I view these square footages based on my first condo. When I first graduated and bought our first condo, we had a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom. It was 1,250 square feet. It's good for a family of 3, but above that, it's getting pretty cramped. But for something in somebody's backyard, I think 1,000 is probably a good space because it is supposed to be clearly subordinate to the home. But if you have a 1 acre lot and you want a detached shop for your home, but you want to also consolidate it with a living space above, instead of having a shop and a living space adjacent, that's more visual mass, more impervious surface. It's nice to compartmentalize them into a single building. So 2,000 would be that cap as it's drafted. Okay.
Do you want to do 1,250?
If you guys are okay generally with what's going on here, maybe what we'll do is I'll reorganize this to where the conditional use is moved out and put,
Yeah.
we swap those things around. And then I'll get a clean draft back over to you. And if I can do it quick enough, maybe we'll hold the public hearing on the 22nd on the proposal as being redrafted. Are you guys okay with a public hearing on the 22nd with that?
yeah,
Yep.
I
love
think
that.
so.
Perfect. We'll do that then.
All right,
Thank you, Scott.
Yep.
Okay, and then item number 3 on our work session this evening is a discussion on the general plan rewrite that's coming up.
Yeah, I just wanted to just give you a quick overview of what a general plan is, what we're required to do in this process, just very conceptually, so you guys can wrap your head around the task that is very quickly coming your way. We, as staff, we were awarded grant funds through UDOT to go ahead and do this project. We're matching those funds with a few of our local dollars, but substantially UDOT is funding this effort. And so UDOT requires that we submit to them a scope of work. for them to just review, make sure the scope matches our application that we had made for the funds in the first place, which we did back on the 31st, so it's about a week ago. So right now I'm in a holding pattern waiting for UDOT to give us the thumbs up on our scope, which means then that we can finish our RFP and go out to bid for a consultant. So if, for example, the next week or two, we get thumbs up from UDOT, they'll take that and say, okay, they're good with our scope. I can then bake that scope into the RFP and advertise it for responses from consultants who would like to help us. We'd likely give them a 30 to 45 day response window. And then after that, we would be able to select a consultant, and based on, their availability and timeline, we would just jump right in. But I wanted to just kind of go over once we do start this process, what does it look like and what are we required to do based on the state code? So, and you guys can go back into the Google Drive. I just uploaded this a little bit before the meeting, but I did save a PDF of the state code that applies to general plans. So this is section 9A10 part 4. And this is specifically talking about general plan requirements for municipalities. I also gave you a paper copy in your packet as well. What I did is I went through this and I just highlighted mays and shalls and what we need to do. So it basically says we may provide for a few of these things. And I'll just go through it real quick for us just to understand. So starting in item 2, we may in our general plan provide for the health, general welfare, safety, energy conservation, transportation, prosperity, civic activities, and it goes on and on of all these things that we could bake into a general plan. We don't have to do all of these things, okay? But general plans can be very elaborate or they could be very simple, depending on your funding and your desire to address some of these things formally, is what we can. But the state code gives us a fairly broad scope of what we can do in general plan. So these items 2A through 2J are what we can do. But when we get down to item 3 here, we start to see a shall. So we shall include a moderate income housing element, which we've done. We've updated it. So we do have that in our existing plan, and we'll take what we have now and we'll kind of move it into our future general plan. We'll have to update the section and some of the demographics in there as we go, because it's already a bit out of date. But generally speaking, we're in compliance. Our general plan has a moderate income housing requirement or element. Okay. In item 4, a municipality may determine the comprehensiveness, extent, and format of the general plan. So that's where it gives us some latitude to be extremely specific or quite broad in these different topics. Okay. Going down, technical assistance from the state. The state will help us if we ask them for some help. They'll give us data if they have it. Basically, they're not going to be obstructionists, is what this section says. And then we kind of get down to where the rubber hits the road. General plan preparation. So as a planning commission, we need to provide notice. We shall provide notice basically to the public, letting the public know we anticipate going through a general plan process and we are going to formulate a recommendation to the city council. So we have to provide a notice that we are going to recommend to the legislative body a new general plan. So there's a noticing process that we'll have to make sure we're in compliance with. So nobody can argue that they didn't know that a general plan was being prepared. We can include some planning for areas outside of our municipal boundaries if we feel like there's reason to do so. So within our annexation areas, we could do some planning for those areas that we anticipate being annexed into the city at some point. So it gives us that latitude. But it does also say that we can't take action affecting that territory if it's not in our municipal boundary until such a time as it's annexed in. Okay. Item 2. At a minimum, so here's where we know we have to do a certain number of things. Okay, at a minimum, we shall include 2A, a land use element. Every general plan has to have a land use element. We have to tell the story of our existing land use and what we anticipate our future land use being. So this basically looks at our current zoning and what we think our future zoning needs to be to accommodate our growth in the future. That is a shall at minimum provide in the general plan. 2A2, at a minimum, we shall provide a transportation and traffic circulation element. We have our exhibit here, right? We've been talking about that. There's also a chapter that will go along with it to describe our existing system, what we think our new system might need, our exhibit of our transportation element, and then we'll probably also have goals and objectives for each element. As far as how are we going to implement our plan? So we'll have goals and objectives for this land use element. We'll have goals and objectives for the transportation element. Okay, additionally, at minimum, we shall include the moderate income housing element. Okay, we already talked about that, but there it is again. We shall include a water use and preservation element. This is new. So last year, the state legislature codified this requirement and gave us a deadline of December of 2025 to integrate a water use and preservation element into our general plan. So this is new. We have to tie water and land use together in the general plan. So we understand our water resources, our limitations, our infrastructure, and tie that to our future land use decisions. So as people request rezones or subdivisions or land use approvals, we have to tie those decisions to our water, which is kind of surprising. We didn't have to do or weren't mandated to do previously. We obviously knew we couldn't approve a subdivision if we didn't have water available to them. So we're doing that, but it's interesting that we're just now seeing this mandated where we have to make decisions, land use decisions based on our water availability. So the state is now saying you need to put this in your general plan. So this is a new chapter that we have to do. Okay. Here it is again. In drafting the moderate income housing element, it goes through more detail. This is what has to be in the moderate income housing element.
It's a big deal to them.
It is a huge deal. It's pretty much half of this code section.
Look at who's on the state legislature, though.
Yep.
Friend for legend.
In
They have
drafting-
a vested interest in making sure that municipalities are building highest density possible.
Building. Yep.
Yeah,
Not out.
yeah.
So starting on this page 3, item B, this is where it then goes into detail to say in all of these required sections, here's how you have to, or the minimum requirements for those sections. So there's minimum requirements for the moderate income housing element. There's minimum requirements for the land use element. There's minimum requirements for the transportation and traffic element, and there's minimum requirements for the land use or the water use and preservation element. Okay. Those are the shalls. We have those 4 shalls. Those are the 4 chapters we absolutely have to have. But beyond that, the state gives us all sorts of latitude to be specific, add more things in there, sustainability, economic development, you name it, we can have a chapter on it if we want it. Okay. So then in the bottom of page 6, item 3, the proposed general plan may include, so we can talk about air quality, forests, soils, rivers, groundwater, harbors, fisheries, wildlife, minerals. It goes on. It's basically saying you can do more. You know, that's a may, not a shall. Okay. Going down page 7 towards the bottom, 10.9a 403.1. This section is only applicable to municipalities in the state that have a fixed railway station. So if you have a track station, you have to have a small area plan around that track station for transit-oriented development. We don't have a track station, we don't have fixed rail, so that doesn't apply to us. That's one thing we can kind of ignore.
Is there any plan to ever get that all the way to Cache Valley?
Light rail, not for 20 to 50 years. So
Maybe from.
there's just not
Tremont
enough density to sustain a light rail system. The first thing that you'll see in Cache Valley is probably bus rapid transit, where you have buses that literally just go back and forth on Main Street all day.
to-
That's just all they do. They have a dedicated lane back and forth, back and forth. Once you kind of get past that, then you jump into light rail, just given the cost. It's not going to happen for a long time.
I hope we never get there.
I heard someone do that. Maybe I heard Tremont into Boise or something is coming.
I mean, it'd be nice to have a
Yeah.
front runner station so you could just hop on the train to the airport.
Yeah, that's what I maybe
Yeah.
heard. I
Yeah.
like Tremont.
Yeah, I mean, the long range plans for rail, whether it's front runner or tracks, is up to Brigham City. That's way down the road.
Yeah.
They actually had a front runner station up to Pleasant View, but they didn't have enough ridership, so they scaled it back to Ogden is the closest front runner.
Hmm.
Anyways,
Okay,
talks
sorry.
about on page 12, the public hearings that were required to go through, the recommendation that you need to make to city council once we get to a final draft that is ready to be moved forward for formal review by our legislative body. Um, let's see, it kind of has some details on the effect of the plan, the effect of the maps. It is advisory. So if you look on the middle of page 13, 10-9A 405, it is a legislatively adopted document, but it's advisory. So you can make decisions that go against the general plan, but there should be a really good reason why you don't follow the general plan. And typically, if you're going to go against a general plan, it should warrant a general plan amendment. If you're going to make a decision that doesn't go with the general plan. But the state code basically is saying it's advisory in nature. It's not the letter of the law, and you can, as a recommending body or as the city council, as the legislative body, they can stray from the general plan if they feel there's good reason to do so. Okay. That's in the future after it's adopted and in effect. The rest of this going through talks about the moderate income housing reporting requirements. So that's not really applicable to our drafting of the general plan. And that's it. So that kind of just gives you a very broad understanding of the state code that regulates the creation and adoption of a general plan. There are some shalls, so we have to make sure we at least do those things. And then there's a bunch of breadth that we can add whatever we feel like we can, and have funding to have a consultant help us put together. So there are limitations.
Have we started the update of the general plan?
No, not formally. And the reason being is because we're waiting for the funding. We're waiting for the RFP so we can hire the consultant,
Yeah.
and then we'll have a kickoff. So we have to get the noticing out to the public. We'll probably send out parliament messages, get the notice out. It'll be a very public process. Initially, after we kick this off, we'll start putting together committees, we'll start data collecting, we'll start putting together a bunch of information, and there won't be a huge amount of public input yet. We'll be basically gathering all the information and materials we need to create the story. And then we'll go out to the public for their comments, the review. We'll have workshops where they look at future land use scenarios. It'll be very iterative, back and forth. We'll have a website where people can review materials and submit comments electronically. We'll have people be able to make public comment in person to me as a staffer, to you guys in public hearings, to the city council in public hearings. This is a good year-long process, maybe two. It can take as long as two. We're hoping it's a year to 18 months max, but you never know.
Feels a little daunting, honestly, like,
Yeah.
Feels
That's-
quick to do it in 1 year with how
Yeah.
much we've looked at.
Well, when you think about it, we only meet twice a month. You know,
That's
that's
why
only
it seems-
24 meetings in a year. So, and we'll take it bite sizes at a time. We won't look at the broad picture for the, we will look at broad picture stuff, but not all the time. We'll say, okay, well, let's look specifically about land use. Let's look at, okay, here's our existing zoning. Here's our population projections. Here's the future demand. Okay, now where in town do we think we put those folks? And what does that look like? So we'll take bite sizes in each discussion and we'll kind of work through it, piecemeal, iteratively.
You mentioned committees, and so does that kind of help spread out the work and then pull it back together so it can get done faster? Is that-
Potentially, or we would have committees that would provide us comments based on their particular expertise.
Gotcha.
So we'll have a steering committee. We might have, some advisory committees that represent special interest groups.
Yeah,
But ultimately, what we will be doing is we will let a consultant submit an RFP. So they will propose to us how to accomplish all of this. The scope of work that we've provided to UDOT is fairly broad. It basically says we're going to comply with state code. And then when we submit the RFP out for bid, consultants will then get back to us and say, we propose to do it like this or like that. We propose to put these committees together or those committees together. And they'll kind of, because they do these things all day long. They specialize in general plans, municipal government consulting. And it'll be very helpful to have somebody who can work on this specifically, because keep in mind, we will still have the day-to-day stuff, subdivisions, conditional use permits that we'll have to keep on our agendas, and staff will have to be working through just to keep up with the day-to-day. But the consultants will be doing the heavy lifting on drafting of language, pulling together all the data to make sense of it all, to tell the story about the data is telling us, do the population projections. And they put all the analytical thought into those big picture things and then distill it back to us as advisory bodies to make sense of it, to provide comments, direction. But it'll be good to get a consultant that can do those heavy lifting tasks. but don't be overwhelmed. It'll be a step-by-step type of a thing. Chapter by chapter,
Thank you, Scott.
Okay.
Thanks for priming the pump there.
for sure. Any more
Um,
questions on that? Process wise?
Any question?
I have none.
No,
You did a good job.
All right.
no studying, what time?
Any staff business?
Last call, if anybody wants to go to the Cash Mid-Year Summit. Tomorrow by 11:30 a.m. is the cutoff for tickets. It's a $20 expenditure. The city will pay for it if you want to go. It's basically a 2.5 hour get together with local planning commissioners, elected officials, mayors, planning staff, planning commissioners to discuss larger regional planning zoning topics. It does count towards your annual education. You guys are going to have plenty of education before the end of the year, so I'm not worried about you meeting your education requirements, but it does count. If you'd like to go, they do feed you dinner, so the $20 isn't spent on nothing, and we'd be happy to have you.
When
if
is
you-
that again?
It's March 15th, or sorry, June.
It's next.
June. Let's not go back to March, please. June 15th.
I
from
want to
5
go.
to 7:30.
I'm just gonna be in a different state, so I won't be able to.
I will do, I was,
You are going?
yeah, I sent you a thing, I think.
Okay.
Okay.
I've had a lot of emails, but I think I had responded to you, right?
Did.
You got a ticket?
A state to
Okay.
another event.
Good.
Right next
Back
to
to
it, so
back.
I'm just gonna run over.
That's
Thing-
perfect.
Things are blending together and I
And get
apologize. but-
dinner at the second. So you
I
can
might
go.
get good treats at the first.
Teresa, you
So
may
it's gonna
have
be a
to,
big calorie.
Yeah.
you may have to just represent the whole commission. I don't think I can be there.
I can.
You can't either, Heather. Oh, yeah, you're.
Okay.
Like I said, I'm already up there.
I just wanted to make sure you guys didn't forget or had, desire to go. They do hold another summit, the big 1-year summit in November, I believe sometime, and we'll
Okay.
extend the invitation when that comes out as well. One other thing I wanted to fill you guys in on, the past 3 days, I have been at a water, it's called the Utah Growing Water Smart Workshop. Fantastic workshop. They had folks come in from different parts of the Intermountain West, some of the arid, drier states, and basically their policy, water policy analysts, and they helped us as a city team. So we had a team that comprised of our mayor, city councilor, we had our engineer, public works director, myself, our administrator, all in the room for 3 days, just talking about water, our constraints, our infrastructure challenges, our availability, future work that is being done, the general plan, the water master plan that is also being done here simultaneously through our public works department. Talking about all of these things and trying to get out onto paper our priorities, some initial goals and objectives that we need to tackle in the short term and then also in the long term. And the reason why we had applied for this and the reason why I wanted our team to go was to help us with this water element in the general plan. And the outcome of that was very helpful in just distilling down our priorities, which we can plunk that into the general plan as goals, objectives, and action items, which is a huge help. We didn't pay a dime for it, but it equated to several thousands of dollars in consulting fees. But with all of the heads in the room that needed to be there to get the technical understanding out on paper. So that ended today. So I'm not going to give you a synopsis of it right now, but we have some great resources that we will probably at the next meeting in a work session, we'll give you an overview. But we'll draw heavily on that workshop for the outcome of that workshop for when we get into that general plan, that particular section of the general plan. It'll be extremely helpful, huge head start. So awesome. That's where I've been. And that's part of the reason why email has been backing up and
I think you
everything
emailed
else.
me back, but-
Yeah. Anyways, just wanted to give you, that's what we've been doing the last couple of days here as staffers.
Okay, well, very good.
Thank
Yep.
you.
I think that's all we have on the agenda. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Move we adjourn.
Aaron
I
moves to
second.
adjourn. Heather seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, you guys.
What meeting are you going to at USC?
Oh, it's